But to give Jason the introduction that he deserves, I'm thrilled to pass over to our buyer for the USA, Sarah Knowles, MW. Hi, Sarah.
Good evening, Anna. Hi, lovely to see you. Thank you for having me tonight. Apologies in advance, members, if you can hear the trains rattle past. But my next door neighbour is actually 6 train lines above London Bridge Station. So apologies in advance for any background noise. However, I can see in the background of Jason's picture a much nicer view. And I'm very excited to welcome him tonight to speak to you all about his wines. We currently have 2 of his wines listed in our fine wine list going, it's live at the moment. And I hope you've spotted them and have been able to pick up a couple of bottles for Christmas or potentially for Thanksgiving if you're celebrating an American tradition in next week on Thursday. I often go to the US about this time every year, so I tend to be out there doing my buying trip at the end of October, early November. A wonderful time to visit California as the weather is usually very stable, very beautiful, still sunny as you can see in Jason's background, but not as hot as the summer months. And I always really enjoy turning south from San Francisco Airport and heading down towards Paso. I spend a lot of my trips further north or further east, looking at the sort of more high production wines from the Lodi or from some of the more famous wines, perhaps from Napa and Sonoma. But when I turn south and head into Paso, I really start to see wine country, as you might recognize from Europe. The wineries get smaller, the lanes get smaller, the roads get smaller, and you start going around little hillsides and wonderful sort of beautiful vineyards and viticultural terroir and sites. And it's a pleasure to drive around there. Driving into Tablas Creek, if anyone makes it down to Paso, is a must. It's a beautiful winery with an incredible cellar door. So please make sure you make it there if you get out after this awful lockdown and have the travel bug following all of this. When I arrive, it's always a wonderful welcome with Jason and with his team. And we tend to go on an incredible vineyard first tour. It's one of the wineries where the vineyard is always at the heart of what Tablas do. And we tend to get on a 4x4 and head off around a little 4x4, little, what are they called, buggy things, and head around the vineyards in a fairly whirlwind style, checking on all the livestock and of course the wonderful grapes. Then we head into the cellar and tend to have a fantastic tasting. As Anna says, huge number of varieties and wines to try. Fairly few actually make it out to the UK, but we'll definitely do our best to try and work on that. So without further ado, I want to not take anything away from Jason's introduction, but I'll let him fully introduce Tablas Creek to you all now. Thank you, Jason, for being with us tonight.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. Welcome virtually to Paso Robles. As Sarah mentioned, this is a very nice time of year usually. We haven't really gotten to winter yet. It has frozen here a couple of times, but the days are still warm. It will start raining pretty soon. We're supposed to actually get some rain tomorrow. And then Paso Robles in the winter is quite wet and quite green. And then the summers are very hot and dry. And then you've got these couple of months of transitional periods in the spring and in the fall where it's generally lovely. So I should probably start by orienting you all. So I'm going to share my screen and show you where we are within California. Let me pull this back to here. Share screen. Okay, so if you are interested in where Paso Robles is, it's almost exactly equidistant between San Francisco, which is about a 3.5-hour drive north of us, and Los Angeles, which is about a 3.5-hour drive south. It's about 2 hours north of Santa Barbara, 2 hours south of Monterey. The nearest city where there's an airport is San Luis Obispo, which is about half an hour south of where we are. In terms of the physical geography of where we are, you can see that we're close to the coast, but not on the coast. And that's a really important thing in California because the Pacific Ocean is always cold. The inland in California, at least in the summer months of the year, is always hot. And so generally the best wine growing regions are in this kind of transitional zone, not right on the coast, not too far inland, but kind of in the mountains, in the coastal mountains that give you some aspects of each. And so within Paso Robles, we are in the northwestern quadrant of the appellation. We're in a sub-appellation called the Adelaide District, which is a mountain appellation. We're at about 500 meters here, about 11 miles from the Pacific, and separated from the Pacific by that one range of mountains, by the Santa Lucia Mountains, that get up to about 1,000 meters. So it's a barrier to a lot of the fog and the direct ocean influence, but we get a lot of the indirect influence, which means that it cools down at night and we get a lot of rain in the winter. In terms of who we are and why we ended up here, Tablas Creek is a joint partnership, equally owned and run by two families. The two families are my family. My father is on the right in this picture. He was Robert Haas. He passed away a couple of years ago at age almost 90 after 7 decades in the wine business. His principal career was as a wine importer. And he started in Burgundy and Bordeaux, as I think most importers in that generation did, but decided fairly early on that the future of wine importing was not in carving up Burgundy and Bordeaux finer and finer, but instead in finding regions that he felt were producing great wines and offering good value, and then trying to find a producer in each of those regions whose wines he could use to help introduce that region into the US market. So with him in this picture is Jacques Perrin, the patriarch of the Perrin family from Château de Beaucastel and Famille Perrin and La Vieille Ferme and the other projects that they're working on in France. He was the one who ran the family estate from the early 1950s through his passing in the late 1970s. This picture is from 1973, which I know because there is a picture of me from that same visit. That's me at about 5 months old, sitting on Jacques' lap. So my dad worked with the Perrins as importer and producer starting in the late 1960s. And he managed to convince Jacques' two sons, Jean-Pierre and Francois Perrin, to travel around the United States with him and introduce the American wine market, not just to Beaucastel, but Châteauneuf-du-Pape and the Rhône Valley more generally, and became friends. And starting in the mid-1970s, they would make a couple of trips a year to different parts of the United States. California was a critical part of those visits because then as now, it's a huge wine market. And they would come away from all of these visits talking about how much California reminded them of the south of France and how surprised they were that in all these new vineyards they saw sprouting up, they didn't see people planting the varieties that they knew and loved from their own region. So they decided to see if they could find their own spot and buy land. This is still an active partnership. This was from not this past summer because nobody went anywhere this past summer, but the summer before in Gigondas, that's me on the right, and Marc Perrin, who's the oldest member of the Perrin family from my generation, on the left. So within Paso Robles, there were really 3 things that convinced us that this was the right spot. The first was calcareous soils, kind of chalky, limestoney old seabed. You can see how white and chalky these are. In the winter, they absorb a ton of water and they turn brown. They're porous like a sponge. And this is really critical in a place like this where we get all of the rain that we expect for the year between November and April. And then it stops raining and it's dry and hot for the rest of the year. So this is a dry farmed vineyard. You can see there's no irrigation lines at all here. These have never been watered. And that would be impossible if we didn't have soils that held the moisture the way that these do. So these soils were really critical, and they're rare in California. It's really only in this little sliver of land in the Central Coast where you can find soils like this. So back to this map, you can basically draw a line kind of between the tip of the Monterey Peninsula and the town of Lompoc, which is, you don't see it on this map, but it's just west of Santa Barbara. And it's really only in this little slice of the Central Coast that you can find calcareous soils, and that's because that's the only part of California that's on the Pacific tectonic plate. The rest of the state is on the North American plate. The 2 other things that we were looking for was enough rainfall in the winter to keep the vines going year round. So that means about 25 to 30 inches of rain a year. we get 28 on average, and we are as far south as you can go in California and get enough rainfall to dry farm. This is a picture from February of this past year. This is Las Tablas Creek that we get our name from, that runs through a corner of the vineyard. Looks like Middle Earth, I think. In the winter. In the summer, it can feel like you're living on the surface of the sun. And then finally, I wanted to show this picture, which I think shows the impact of those mountains and kind of the push and pull of the ocean influence that we see on a daily basis all year. So this is looking west from the top of our tallest hill. You can see this is a summer photo. You can see the grasses have turned brown, but that fog bank that sits over the Pacific Ocean is held back by this range of mountains. This is an early morning photo. So you see the fog, it encroaches almost all the way to us. But then as the sun comes up and gets higher, it retreats back over the water. And then as the night falls, and it comes back in and comes back out. But it's rarely foggy where the vineyard is, which is great because these are late ripening grapes that need a lot of heat and a lot of sun to get ripe. And we get the cooling from the Pacific without all of that moisture. And the moisture has some potential negative impacts in terms of mildew and rot. And if you can get cooling without fog, that's ideal. If fog is the only way that you can get cooling in a place in California, you'll take it. But even better is to not have to. So we bought this property in 1989 at the end of a 3-year search, and then had to figure out how to get the grape varieties that we wanted to plant. And that was not trivial because several of the varieties we wanted to work with had never been used in the United States. We knew we wanted to work with grapes like Grenache Blanc, which is the lead grape in the white that we have tonight. Grapes like Counoise on the red side, Picpoul, and they'd never been used in the United States. So we had to import cuttings of those and took the opportunity to bring in high quality cuttings of all of the rest of the Rhône varieties like Syrah and Grenache and Mourvedre and Roussanne and Marsanne and Viognier. We built our own grapevine nursery on site, which you can see here. This is one of the shade houses. We've propagated over 1 million vines on site here since 1992, and produced vines not just for ourselves, but also made them available to the rest of the wine community in California and really all over the West Coast, and have sold millions of grapevines and helped kind of set the conditions for the modern Rhône Rangers movement. Okay, I think that's enough of me lecturing at the beginning. I'm gonna stop sharing, and I would love to have you jump in, Sarah, and kind of let me know where you'd like me to go from here.
So no, that was a lovely introduction. Thank you. The pictures are phenomenal. What photographs! I think we're all feeling quite jealous that we're not in your vineyard at the moment. But perhaps we could talk about the white wine, given that we've sort of started talking about Grenache Blanc there, and I know that I've already started drinking, so I can't stop me. I'm glad you're also drinking, especially as it must be breakfast with you. But judgment here. No judgment. But yes, if you could tell us a little bit more about the white wine that we're currently looking at, that would be great. So it's the 2018 that we have, and you've already said that yes, it's based on a majority of Grenache Blanc. But there are 4 other grape varieties in the mix here.
There are. Let me I actually put together a slide with the details so that everyone can see it.
Great.
So we do 3 tiers of blends, and I think I have a picture of that as well. We do the Patelin de Tablas tier, the Côte de Tablas tier, and the Esprit de Tablas tier. And Patelin is French slang for neighborhood. Except you would really only use it in the country. It's kind of like a hamlet or a section of the backwoods. The implication is that you are pretty deep in the sticks. You wouldn't call yourself from a patelin if you're from a high class, very formal area. It's slangy, and the idea is that this is a wine that we've sourced from our neighborhood. If you look on the back label of the bottles, you will see that there's a list of vineyards that we get the fruit from, which includes there's some fruit that we grow ourselves, but it's sourced from 8 other local vineyards, all of whom bought grapevine cuttings from us. So there's two pieces of this. One, we wanted to be very careful as to who we worked with. We've got over 100 vineyards just in Paso Robles who've bought vine cuttings from us, and we work with somewhere between 6 and 10 each year. And that's so that we can work with the people whose farming we trust, whose business practices we trust, and who we think are in really good parts of the appellation. So it's in several of the sub AVAs of Paso Robles. So it just is a Paso Robles appellated wine because it includes multiple sub appellations, but it's all from those Tablas Creek cuttings. It's led by Grenache Blanc, which is the most widely planted white grape in the Rhône Valley, but far from the best known. I think if you ask people to talk about white Rhône varieties, you'll probably get people talking about Viognier and Marsanne and Roussanne before they get to Grenache Blanc. But what we love about it is that it's a Rhône variety that is also quite high in acid. So it's got richness, but it's got brightness. A lot of the Rhône whites are softer and fatter and denser. And that can be lovely, but it can be kind of one-dimensional without the relief that you get from the brightness of the higher acid varieties. So
definitely
in this
I
wine,
think, Jason, that really always stood out about this wine, particularly from your range, but also your range in general, is that ability to maintain the acidities. So when you think of especially white Rhônes and white Rhône blends, you can often think of quite broad, quite hard work wines. Oily comes to mind, rich, fat wines. Whereas this wine in my glass has such tension and precision. I think it's really a fantastic example of the blending skills that you have there. But I think you also had on that slide that it was stainless steel only.
It is.
The sort of choice you're making here.
Yeah. So the thing about the family of white Rhône varieties is that there's really seven or eight, depending on how you want to define it, white varieties that you can choose from. And those three that I mentioned, Roussanne, Marsanne, and Viognier, are all quite rich and all quite low in acid. But the others are all bright. And there was an era particularly in the 1950s and 60s, where it was the richer varieties that were preferred. They were the ones that demanded the higher prices. And so a lot of the vineyards in the Rhône switched from a mix of brighter and richer varieties to almost exclusively these richer varieties. And I think it's in the last decade, as people are wrapping their heads around a warming climate, that people are kind of coming back around to the importance of these brighter varieties. So we've got Grenache Blanc as the lead in this, but we've also got 5% Clairette Blanche, which is another high acid white Rhône variety that's enjoying something of a renaissance in Châteauneuf-du-Pape at the moment, and are trying to create the tension between those brighter varieties and then the richer Viognier, Roussanne, Marsanne component. Yeah.
And I should note that there's a discrepancy on the vintage here. I think Keith may have just picked up on it in the audience, but we had it as 2017 online, and it seems to be a mistake. It's actually 2018 that we're selling and that we have, and that Jason and I are talking about tonight. I have asked our website team to update that tonight. So hopefully tomorrow it will all be showing the correct vintage and the correct wine. But it is the 18 that everybody may have purchased or may have received. Apologies for that mistake. I think in the last few months, with everything that's going on, if that one's the one that slipped through, I'm not too worried. No, Jason, tell me again, because I'm already salivating drinking this wine or tasting this wine, and I think you had some food recommendations. But what's your favorite pairing with this wine?
Honestly, my absolute favorite pairing with this wine is Mussels Marinara. So like the classic Mediterranean dish of mussels cooked in white wine and garlic. Like for me, that's sublime. But any sort of fresh seafood, preparations with garlic and olive oil, fresh cheeses, it's really pretty flexible. The brightness that it has makes it a pretty easy dining companion. Yeah. No, perfect. Now, before we talk about the red, I think we need to go back to the vineyards, because I know, having driven around, and what are they called? I keep still racking my brain on the little 4x4 open air. Quads.
Quads. I'm clearly not a vehicle girl, am I? So, but on a quad bike at yours, we definitely see some sights. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, especially in light of your recent certification?
Yes, and I'm going to share some pictures because this is
Thank
something I
you.
can talk about, but it's much better if you can see it.
Definitely.
So, Tablas Creek, our vineyard is certified organic and biodynamic. We've been farming organically since the beginning. We've been certified since 2003. We've been farming biodynamically since 2010, certified since 2016. Beaucastel has been fully organic since the 1960s. And one of Jacques Perrin's contributions is that he was the first in his region to refocus on organic farming in the 1960s. And we, in the last couple of years, have been a part of a new pilot program, which was just announced in August, which is called Regenerative Organic. And this incorporates what we feel are the most appealing pieces of organic and biodynamic. So you start with the organic standards, which is a government-regulated, audited standard that you're not using chemical herbicides or pesticides or fertilizers. But then it adds to that biodynamics focus on biodiversity, the microbiome, soil health, but divorces it from some of the more mystical aspects of biodynamics, like the cycles of the moon, and some of the things that I think are a little harder to justify scientifically. And then adds to that a commitment to resource use reduction. So, for example, to have to move towards dry farming. This is another dry farmed vineyard that we have that, again, has never seen any irrigation. So we're planting farther apart so that the vines have more cubic meters of soil to get what they need. It includes a commitment to moving to all renewable energy sources. So we have 4 different solar arrays on the property. We have one more going in at the end of the year that should get us to 100% solar. It involves the incorporation of animals into the vineyard. This is part of our mixed flock of sheep and alpacas. This is Paco the alpaca, and then a number of our sheep. We've got about 200 sheep, and we're entering lambing season. So anyone who wants to see lots of lamb pictures should follow Tablas Creek on Instagram or Facebook in coming months, because we're going to be unable to stop showing them. It also involves a commitment to be audited to show that we are not just paying our farm workers a living wage and that their working conditions are safe, but that we're working collaboratively with them, that we are involving them in discussions as to what we're going to do and soliciting feedback and acting on that feedback. We also are working to do things that are not necessarily relevant for the health of the vineyard proper, but are instead just the right things to do for the local environment. We've now caught 4 separate wild swarms of bees and given them homes in beehives. And this is our viticulturist / beekeeper. We have a full-time shepherd on staff. So the farming piece of what we do is really important for who we are. It's also very much a continuation of that tradition that was started at Beaucastel, in that we feel that farming the way that we do gives us the best possible chance that we have to express the character of the place that we're in. Because the more you put onto the vineyard from the outside, the less it's going to taste like the things that could only be found in the vineyard, that kind of deeper bedrock. So all of what we're doing is really focused on the idea of maximizing the expression of the terroir that we found here in Paso Robles.
Yeah. No, the biodiversity you seem to have cultivated does look fantastic. And when you hear organic and biodynamic producers talking about why they've done some of this, it seems to really, the puzzle pieces seem to fit into place. So the new certification, perhaps bringing in slightly more of the logic and taking out, as you say, some of the elements that people can often be a bit skeptical about, sounds fantastic. Are other people looking to be qualified or certified in the same way? I know that you were the first in America.
Yeah, we were the first. Because of all of the things that we were already doing, the flock of sheep that we already had, the biodynamic and organic certifications, we were invited to be a part of the pilot program to help craft the standards, because this is not just a wine standard. This is something which is designed to be kind of a roadmap for agriculture writ large. It's an international standard. There are separate protocols for row crops and for orchards and for fibers. I mean, one of the big driving forces behind this new certification is Patagonia. And they wanted to be able to certify that their whole supply chain was farming in a way that was consistent with their corporate ethos. So regenerative organic cotton is a really huge focus of this program, so that you can have the raw materials for textiles. But there's also protocols for livestock and protocols for chocolate and protocols for grains. I mean, really, so I think there are 13 different protocols in the initial one, and we helped craft the one for wine. And I had a conversation last week. I do a weekly Instagram live conversation, and my guest last week was Elizabeth Whitlow, who is the executive director of the Regenerative Organic Alliance. And she said that since this was announced in August, they've already had 40 other American vineyards and wineries get their paperwork in to be a part of this. So it's incredibly exciting. I mean, I'm proud to be the first, and equally excited that it doesn't sound like we'll be the only ones for much longer.
No, it's a wonderful initiative that you've gotten to early, but leading the way, I think, is great. But no, perhaps we should now talk about the red.
I would love to.
Yeah. My second glass.
I was much more prepared for this than I usually am for my live virtual tastings. I actually got 2 glasses.
I know, me too. Well, I always feel that when I hold them up, it sort of does look daft, it being back to front. But apologies. I hope everyone's getting a shot in the bottle.
No, it does. It looks right on screen. So it's
wonderful. Just back to front to me.
the magic of technology in the background. I will again. I have the basics of this wine that I put together. So you can think of there are really 3 main grapes in the Southern Rhône: Syrah, Grenache, and Mourvèdre. The way that they're often spoken of would lead you to believe that they're all sort of equally important in the South, and they are not. Grenache is far and away the dominant grape variety in the Southern Rhône. Something like 70% of the acreage in Southern Rhône. And it's the Northern Rhône where Syrah is more dominant. And you have to get all the way down to the Mediterranean coast and into Bandol, where you can find places where Mourvèdre is dominant. But for us, the 3 different tiers that we do, each of the tiers is based on one of those grapes being in the lead. For the Patelin, we really wanted to show off Syrah as the focus variety. And Syrah is dark and meaty and spicy and minerally, a little bit bacony, like that kind of almost pancetta kind of pig fat character is absolutely characteristic of Syrah.
Yeah, bacon.
But Syrah's downside is that it's often not very friendly. It can be kind of austere. It can be tannic. It can be low in acid, and it's not very juicy. And so the lovely thing about being able to blend Grenache and Mourvèdre and Counoise in is that we can still get this wild darkness that we love about Syrah, but give it juiciness from Grenache and earth and spice from Mourvèdre and this little bright, zesty. I think of adding Counoise as like squeezing a dash of lemon onto a dish of food. It just brightens all of the other flavors up that are there. And so we can end up with this kind of 1 foot in the Northern Rhône and Syrah's darkness, 1 foot in the Southern Rhône with Grenache and Mourvèdre's juiciness, red fruit, and generosity, and something which has hopefully the best characteristics of each.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely singing today. I think having had the benefit of sort of 3 years from harvest, it's now starting to relax, although I feel like it could go, a bit further still. You don't have to worry if this is in the back of your cupboard or on the wine rack for a few years. This is going to hold up very well. But it's got that lovely black fruit flavor that's coming from the Syrah for me, that kind of black currant, and then a much more generous red fruit palate seems to come out on the palate rather than on the nose, which is more black fruit dominant. But Yeah, again, your acidity levels seem great on this. So nice and tight. It's got quite a lean structure, given that this is from some quite weighty grape varieties. So this is not going to, be too cloying or too much. It's definitely got that freshness that you're sort of showing through both wines.
And I think it's important to note that Paso Robles has just as many cool climate aspects as it does warm climate aspects.
Mm.
I think people are often influenced by what it's like during the day in the summer, because that's when people are awake, and that's when most people visit. They visit in summer or fall, where it could be 100 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's not at all unusual here. But the nights are cold here year round. That swing in temperature between the daytime high and the nighttime low is higher than any other wine growing region in North America. Typically 45 degrees Fahrenheit. I mean, it's a massive swing. And the shoulder seasons are quite cool. So the beginning of the summer, that kind of April and May, is quite a bit cooler than it is in the Southern Rhône. And same thing in October and November. Those are both quite a bit cooler than they are in the Rhône. So if you look at the average temperature, we're about 1 degree cooler than Châteauneuf-du-Pape. And we pick the same varieties a week to 10 days later on average than they do at Beaucastel, with the same sugars and higher acids. So if you ask the grapevines whether it's cooler or warmer here than it is in the south of France, they will tell you that it's cooler here. And I think that was something that we didn't realize at first. We were thrown by the same thing that everybody else was, that the days are really hot here. It must be a hot climate. And we realized that some of the varieties that, like Syrah's not that widely planted in the Southern Rhône, because it can be a little heavy and a little one-dimensional, but it's really not here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's definitely showing that freshness. But I think also some of this comes to your style, Jason, which I'd love you to talk more about, because I know some of your neighbors produce much bigger wines, which I happen not to be such a fan of, often with some residual sugar, whereas these wines are totally dry and much more elegant or sort of European in style. Although I think I often blind taste Southern Rhône wines and put them entirely out of France. So, but that aside, we use that as an idea for members. But would you like to tell us more about your winemaking and your philosophy in general, and perhaps a little insight into how you're approaching this?
Sure. I mean, it's important to remember that we have 5 generations of Perrins looking over our shoulder. So that can be fairly grounding. But our goal is always to make wines that have a balance of fruit elements and savory elements and spice elements and mineral elements. So it is, because we have such a long growing season, because it doesn't usually rain here in any significant way until the second half of November, you have the luxury of waiting if you want. And a lot of our neighbors will wait longer than we do to pick, because the nights are cold. You still have okay acidity, but you can get this incredibly luscious, hedonistic flavor profile if that's what you're going for. And those wines are often rewarded by very high scores from critics. So I certainly understand why people will choose to follow that. But I've always felt that the costs are still too high. I mean, I love Syrah when it has these kind of melted licorice and blueberry jam flavors, but not at the expense of the spicy, meaty elements that you get when you pick it a little bit earlier. So we do pick earlier than most of our neighbors. We're typically starting harvest at the very end of August or beginning of September, finishing the very end of October or beginning of November. I have neighbors who are often waiting to pick all the way into Thanksgiving. So it's a choice, but it's a choice informed by, again, those 5 generations of our French partners looking over our shoulders. In terms of the winemaking itself, again, I have a couple more pictures to show.
Great.
So the bulk of the fermentation and aging that we do is done in these large, they're called foudres, 1,200 gallon, 4,500 liter oak barrels, 20 times the volume of a normal barrique wine barrel. And that means that we're not getting as much exposure to the oak because there's the volume to surface area ratio is higher.
Yeah.
We also use these for longer. Typically, we'll use these for decades. We've never gotten rid of one. Our first one from 1990. At Beaucastel, typically they figure 40 or 50 years is the lifespan of one of these foudres.
Okay.
We ferment things individually and then blend in the spring. So we're not pre-committing ourselves at harvest to putting particular lots together. And we'll have dozens of wines that we'll make, well, usually 25 wines that we'll make in a given year, which will go from blends to varietal bottlings of the individual varieties if we feel that that's appropriate.
Yeah.
And then they go back into those big foudres to age. So it's a relatively long aging that we'll give it in the cellar, typically about 2 years in neutral wood. And then they're bottled just before the second harvest. The reds are bottled just before not the harvest immediately after the ones that they're from, but the next one.
Mm-hmm.
All of the fermentations we do are entirely with native yeasts, native malolactics, and again, trying to keep our own fingerprints off of them to maximize the chance that we have to show off the character of the terroir.
Mm-hmm. That's the picture I remember most of visiting you in November.
So this is our harvest chalkboard from mid-harvest this year. You can see it stretches up to the top. There's a whole other half of the chalkboard that wasn't yet filled, that got filled between then and the middle of October when we finished harvest. But we'll have 140 lots typically at the end of harvest. And then it won't be till spring that we'll put them together. And that's because we don't know if a particular Syrah lot should go into our Esprit or into our Côte or into our Patelin or into a varietal Syrah. We just don't know that until it's done fermenting. And so we're trying to keep our options open.
And to ferment them all separately must be incredibly tricky work. Keeping all of these
requires good record keeping.
Yeah.
To know where everything is and where it came from and where it was and what stage it's at, for sure.
Because looking at the numbers, some of these are in very small amounts. So having those smaller oak barrels rather than large tanks. They may look like large oak barrels to many of us, but they're still tiny relative to the tank size that one can go up to now. So having those must be a huge help.
Yeah, we have lots of very small stainless steel tanks and lots of medium and large barrels. So we tend to do things in lots of a few hundred cases, and then put those together as we feel is right in the spring after harvest.
Great, fantastic. Well, I think I was going to ask you about the harvest this year, but I think Anna is just coming back. Yes, I saw you. Is coming back to interrupt us as we've had lots of members' questions coming in. But hopefully one of them has asked you about the current vintage, and I'm sure Anna will guide us through the questions as we go. But I will thank you, Jason, for a great introduction, and I'll hand over to Anna.
Lovely. Well, thank you both so much. We have had the questions coming in thick and fast, so we will try and get through plenty of them as well. I may have to combine some questions, members, so I apologize. Some of you have asked some similar things. So for ease and to avoid repetition, I'm going to combine some questions for you, Jason.
Sure.
So I think first up, we've had a few people ask roughly around the topic of dry farming. So maybe to explain a little bit more about what dry farming involves, but also some members are wondering whether with global warming, you're potentially concerned that dry farming might be a problem.
Yes. So what it basically involves is making sure that your vines have what they need to be self-sufficient without you having to irrigate them on an annual basis. This is legislated in a lot of the great wine regions in Europe. I mean, you are not allowed to irrigate in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. You are not allowed to irrigate in Burgundy. You are not allowed to irrigate in again most of the great wine regions in Europe. It's harder in California because of the seasonality of the rainfall. So you need to have the right kind of soils, and you need to have kind of trained your vines the right way. So it's not as simple as just taking a vineyard that was irrigated and turning the irrigation off, because you will then have the root system of your vine at the surface waiting for you to give it water, and all of a sudden there's no water coming. It's not like the vines will suddenly reorient themselves and go where there's water. But if they've had to survive like that from the beginning, they do build much deeper root systems. And in many ways, they're more resilient to droughts and to a drier future than an irrigated block. Because if you think of what I do feel like water is going to be one of the big flashpoints. Water availability, particularly groundwater availability, is going to be one of the big flashpoints in California under global warming. And but even the most aggressive projections suggest that if it does warm a few degrees in the next half century globally, that rainfall in California is probably going to be something like 20% less than it is now on average. That is not such a big difference that on an annual basis, it matters all that much to grapevines. I mean, unless you're right at the very fringes of them being able to survive already, which happily we're not. But it does mean that everyone who is trying to maintain the same amount of water going onto their vineyards and is pumping it out of the ground, you're going to end up with the groundwater reserves depleted. So farming in a way that allows the vines to draw what they need from their environment rather than having to pump it out and irrigate them is actually one of the hedges that we're using against climate change. And you can think of this in terms, the most important piece of this is in terms of vine density. So in a typical irrigated vineyard, you're looking at anywhere from 1,800 to 3,000 vines per acre. The old dry farm vineyards in California are like 500 vines per acre. So you have a lot fewer vines competing for the same resources. And that gives them enough room to roam to find what they need when they're young. And then as they age, they keep questing down deeper and deeper to find the places where there's water year round. And that makes them more resilient should you have droughts or should you have heat spikes.
I think you're on mute.
I was, sorry. Fantastic, Jason. Thank you. I really appreciate the thorough answer there, and hopefully members who'd asked that has answered it. Leading on to a slightly different topic, but still weather related. You obviously, we in the UK watch the awful wildfires in California, and a lot of members have asked whether you've been directly affected by them.
It's important to remember how big California is. So the nearest, I'm going to go back, I'll share the map, and then I do have some pictures that I think are worth talking about. So the main wine country in California is north of San Francisco. So you think of Napa and Sonoma, both of them are north of San Francisco. There's also a nice wine country in the Santa Cruz Mountains, which is kind of south of San Francisco. And then the Central Coast includes Monterey, San Luis Obispo, and Santa Barbara counties. But we're 210 miles from San Francisco, 260 miles from Napa. So that's a long way for smoke to come, and it's a long way away for the fires to be. The nearest fires to us were in Monterey County. There was a small, well, nothing was really that small, a medium-sized fire called the Dolan Fire near Big Sur, northwest of us, about 60 miles northwest. And then there was a bigger fire in Monterey County near Salinas and Carmel that was about 100 miles north of us. Those were the two that got close enough to send some serious smoke our way. But it seems like the smoke was not at the surface for long enough to impact the grapes. We've done a lot of testing on what we've picked. We haven't found any evidence of smoke taint. And then the really big fires north of San Francisco, that was high up in the atmosphere by the time it got to us. And let me show you what it looked like. So this is not overcast, this is smoke. So it's this strange yellow landscape. It was thick enough that the sun didn't come out for 3 days. This is in September. We were harvesting during this, and let's see if I can find that picture. So again, you can see we were picking. There's no smoke at the surface, so the air was fresh. That was the marine layer at the surface, and it was actually quite a bit cooler than it had been. This was during a heat spike. This broke one of the heat spikes, so it was It was in the 70s after several days that were up around 100. So it looked really strange. It was kind of alarming, but we think that we dodged any of the real negative impacts of the fires. Fingers crossed. I feel like I should look for some wood to knock on as I'm.
We will all knock on wood and cross our fingers.
Yes,
but
please.
Wonderful news that, given the widespread of the fires this year, that you happen to be one of the winemakers I'm talking to that hasn't been directly affected. So that's wonderful. Although those photos are astonishing, to be able to see how far the smoke was impacting the light quality is yeah. We were all watching with horror from here, and we're glad you're good.
I actually saw some pictures from Europe of very red sunsets, just because there was so much smoke that was being put into the atmosphere from California that it made it all the way around the globe.
Yeah. No, it was a terrible year for fires this year in California, I believe. But it's becoming part of day-to-day winemaking in many different regions. This isn't unique to you guys.
No, for sure.
To another winemaker from Northern California who's telling me that he was now in touch with a South African lab and sending samples there for smoke taint, because he was getting a different or interesting result or different analysis from there. But the Australians, we've had fires in Europe too over the last few years, so it's this is a growing problem that we're all going to have to try and work a solution to.
Yeah, I mean it's a huge issue in California. Just because the winters are so wet that you get a lot of vegetative growth, and then the summers are so dry that everything is incredibly susceptible to fire.
Yeah.
And that's one of the other things that's worth noting about the Regenerative Organic program, is that a piece of that program is that your farms have to be pulling carbon out of the atmosphere in order to be certified. So one of the things that it's doing is trying to measure that you are doing practices that are increasing the carbon content of your soil. And plants are the natural engine that do this anyway. But very often that's through tilling and other ways. It's released right back into the atmosphere as fast as it's pulled out. But between permaculture and no-till and cover cropping and doing things like biochar, basically trying to turn it into more stable forms of carbon in your soil, agriculture can have the ability to help be a part of this larger picture solution of how you deal with climate change. And that's one of the things that we are most one of the reasons we find it most appealing as an ethos.
Ah, fantastic.
Thank you so much, Jason, and thank you, Sarah, as well. We've had a lot of questions about varieties. Obviously, it's a bit of a passion point of yours, Jason. We've had a question from Tim wondering what the function, of the small amount of nanus, excuse my pronunciation. And likewise, Sam Yeomans saying, are there any varieties that you expect to see more of, or that you're planning to grow more of in Paso?
I'm sorry, there was a little auditory glitch. What was the variety specifically that he was asking about?
Sarah, you're gonna have to help me. Nanus, the variety you mentioned earlier in the talk. You have a small.
Was it not Counoise?
Yeah, it might be.
Counoise.
Yeah. Apologies.
No.
So actually, let me show a few pictures of some of these varieties, because I think that would be fun.
Beautiful.
Pictures towards the end of harvest, which will give you a sense of what each of them is like a little bit. So this is a Grenache cluster. Again, this is at the very beginning of harvest. So Grenache is a fairly late ripening grape. You can see it hasn't even turned all the way red yet. There's still.
You'll have to tell us, yes, red or white Grenache there.
So this is Grenache Noir.
Good.
But it is not.
Not fully noir.
It's not fully noir yet. And honestly, Grenache Noir is a little bit of a misnomer. It should be like Grenache purple. But you compare that to something like Mourvedre, which is somewhat darker. Again, it's not ripe yet, but it's somewhat darker. And Syrah, which is really very dark. I had these clusters are also much smaller. I had to zoom in closer to get this picture. So the clusters are smaller, the skins are thicker, and the color is more kind of bluish black. And then Counoise which is large berried. It's the latest ripening of all of them, so it does all turn purple, but it turns that kind of medium purple that you see with the darker grapes here, not to this blackish bluish color. It was renowned as a table grape before the development of seedless grapes. And in fact, if you go and find, there's these beautiful series of ampelographies, kind of these grape studies that were published in the early 20th century. And if you read about Counoise, it talks about it as this wonderful table grape that you can also make wine out of, with the implication, like, if you insist, you could make wine out of it, but really you should just eat them. And they're large berried, they're very juicy, they have good acid. So the impact of adding it to a blend is often to open up these varieties that are more tannic and denser and lower in acid, particularly Syrah. And at Beaucastel, they've been planting more Counoise as the climate warms, because they feel like it brings freshness and elegance to the varieties that are higher in alcohol and more tannic and lower in acid. And I feel like there was a second part of that question that Anna asked that I didn't answer. Something about
yes, it was whether you thought there were, or whether you're planning to plant any new varieties. But I think Sam's question in general is there anything we should expect to see more of coming from Paso?
Yeah,
well,
what's
yes.
the hot thing?
So we decided in 2003 that we'd had so much success with some of the more obscure, less reputed varieties from the Rhône, like Counoise, like Grenache Blanc, that we should bring in all of the Châteauneuf grapes. And so in 2003, we took cuttings of the 7 grapes that we didn't yet have. So Muscardin, Picardin, Vaccarez, Terre Noir, Cinsault, Bourboulon, and Clairette. And they've all been coming out of quarantine little by little over the last 15 years. So we got the first of them in the ground in 2010, the last of them in the ground just this past summer, 2019. So we have some grapes that we are really just now wrapping our heads around. So there are 3 that we harvested for the first time last year. They are, one of them is Cinsault, which is pretty well known. That was actually here in California before, but we just hadn't brought it in. But then 2 new grapes, Bourboulon and Vaccarez, that have never been planted outside of France. And so these are 3 of the new ones. The others, I think, are maybe a little better known, like Clairette Blanche is something which I mentioned earlier that the Rhône is really getting quite excited about because of its freshness. I think that's going to turn out to be a great grape here. And then within the things that we already have, I feel like some of these later ripening varieties like Mourvèdre, like Counoise, like Roussanne, those are really well positioned in California, in this warm climate and in this warming climate, to be grapes that are better suited than a lot of what's currently being planted. It's going to be harder and harder to find places that are going to be good for a grape like Sauvignon Blanc. But if you can plant Grenache Blanc in those same places, that's in a lot of ways a much better bet. So I think there's potential for a lot of these grapes just kind of as a family, because these, again, are grapes that are from the warmest, sunniest part of France. And so they're inherently a little better suited for California than grapes from the Loire or grapes from Alsace or even grapes from Burgundy. That's only going to become more true as everybody faces the reality of a warmer, drier future.
Yeah. No, I think you're one step ahead, as it were, in terms of planning for varieties that can cope with heat. But I also, without wanting to interrupt Anna or Jason, I realized I've just topped myself up again on the white. But I didn't explain or tell members my quick tasting note on the white earlier. But I honestly, if you're watching this and thinking about what to buy, please take a punt on this. It's an unusual blend from America. It's not the most inexpensive wine, but it is ridiculous value. It's gone down a charm tonight. It's got a huge amount of flint, minerality, saltiness. There's lots of lemon and citrus notes. It really is just totally delicious wine, almost unripe nectarine flavors. Very Moorish, very refreshing. Will be super with a huge amount of food. I think Jason mentioned mussels earlier, but I'm looking forward to having this with a roast chicken. So I really couldn't push this enough. It's got the herbal note that's coming through on the finish. It really over delivers. So I think the red is delicious. I'm holding that back for a little later when I've got some food on the table. But this white makes me very excited. Sorry, Anna, I'm sure there are more questions. I'm taking up time.
No, not at all. It's got me thirsting for some more, Sarah. I'm going to finish.
I just keep downing it.
I'm going to finish my job first, and then I'm going to join you. Jason,
you're much more of a professional.
I think we'll try and squeeze one more question in, if it's all right. We did have quite a few members ask on the provenance of your oak. So is it French or American? And just questioning why you started going into it, why the larger foudre size? Have you ever used barriques, or has it always been foudres?
So it's all French oak. And in fact, the big barrels and big wooden tanks that we use are made in France and shipped across the ocean through the Panama Canal and up the Pacific coast to us. California is a place where there is a lot of small barrel. There's a pretty good established group of cooperages, but they make almost exclusively small barrels, because that's really what the Cabernet and Pinot Noir and Chardonnay producers who drive the California industry are looking for. And those are varieties where you, not always, but very often you want to have quite a tasteable, noticeable oak influence in the wines. In general, with wines from the Southern Rhône, I mean, whether they're made from the Rhône or whether they're made in the New World, with the exception of Syrah, those wines are not generally shown with much in the way of tasteable new oak. So we do always buy a few dozen barriques each year. Maybe that's a little bit of an exaggeration. 10 to 20 new barriques each year. And we'll do half of them with Syrah and half of them with Roussanne. And then we'll be able to use that little bits of the sweeter, spicy new oak in a few percent here, a few percent there in different blends that we do. But with both of these wines, I mean, the Patelin de Tablas is fermented and aged in big wooden upright tanks. There are a couple of those that are new, but still there's so much volume compared to the surface area that even when those are brand new, the impact on the wine is gentler than it would be in a new small barrel. And then you use them for longer. So a relatively small percentage is new, and then the impact of that new wood is gentler. And that's because we want people to be able to taste the varieties, to taste the expression of the soil, and to taste the minerality that these varieties have. And it's easy to cover that up with winemaking. And our goal is to have our that was my dog seeing a squirrel that had run onto the patio here, and she's
glad she's protecting you.
She's protecting me from that squirrel.
Yeah.
So we're basically trying to show off the fruit and the land rather than the winemaking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's definitely working in these two wines, but I've also tasted your wider range, and you always taste the grape and the vineyard first, which I think is always a wonderful note. It's tougher. You have to have much better grapes to be able to rely on that, rather than buying in just very expensive oak. So it's wonderful to see.
Thank you.
And Sarah, I couldn't resist any longer. It hit 8 o'clock and I've had to start. So I will allow Sarah to finish off, but I would like to thank you, Jason, and thank you, Sarah, both for a lovely evening, and thank you, members, for all coming. But I will allow Sarah for a final sign-off. So thank you.
Well, no, it leaves me to almost repeat, but to also thank the tastings team behind the scenes. There's Emma and Tim, as well as Anna, who've been marshalling everything perfectly tonight, as always. Thank you, members, for coming. It's wonderful to continue these. I think to be able to see straight into the vineyard, in this case, in Paso on a wet day or a wet evening in UK, it's such a joy. And I hope that it's really added some sunshine to your Monday night here. And I hope that you try these wines. Don't forget, it's Thanksgiving next week. It's all about having a nice excuse to celebrate. And I think we can all celebrate things American at the moment wonderfully. And so I think we should all raise a glass next Thursday to hopefully better times to come. Jason, thank you huge amount for spending your time with us today. I know that it's an important time in the winery at the moment, so we're very grateful that you've given us your time. The presentation was excellent, so thank you for introducing your wines again. I hope to see you.
And thank you everyone. Thank you everyone who joined. I realize this is not a time when people are traveling, but if you do make a trip to California once we're out of this particular mess, please come see us. We'd love to show you what we're working on.
I would definitely second that. It's a fantastic cellar door operation and a wonderful place to visit. I really hope to see you again next autumn on my buying trip, which will hopefully be back on in 2021. Cheers, everybody. Have a lovely evening. Thanks again, Jason. Thank you, Anna, Tim, and Emma. Cheers.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.